All right, webinar started. Attendees are on hold. They can't hear us. So when you're ready, just say start broadcast and I'll start it. So we've already got 9 people come in. So oh, 11, 12. So yeah, numbers are picking up quite quickly. So
Excellent.
just let me know when it's good. Just say start it and then boom, I'll do it. All right. I'm not going to unmute myself anymore after this. So if you need anything, I'll be responding in the chat.
How will we
So
know how will we know it's actually started when you start it?
I mean, it'll just say broadcast. All it, like broadcast is now started. All attendees are in listen only mode.
Okay,
So
perfect.
you'll hear that, and I'll put a message in the chat as well for you guys. But yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna mute my mic now, and good luck.
You all good, Craig?
Yep, all good from my side, Chris, whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Just give it a couple of seconds because they're still ticking in.
Sure, yeah, that's it.
Okay, Mo, if you want to start it, Craig, I'll just tell people we'll wait a couple of seconds because other people are still logging in. Good morning. This is Chris from Tame Bay. We'll be starting the webinar in just a couple of minutes. We're just giving it a little while for people to log in. Good morning. This is Chris from Tame Bay. We'll be starting the webinar in 1 minute. Good morning. This is Chris from Tame Bay, and welcome to today's How to Master International Success webinar. We're thrilled today to be joined by Craig from World First. We've recently done a research paper, a white paper with World First, where we spoke to numerous Tame Bay readers who are already selling successfully abroad. And much of the content of today's webinar is based on the findings from that research. So this is real life information from online retailers who have been there and done it. And the focus of today's webinar is how to recognize the signs that you're ready for explosive international growth, and how to start capturing that and taking advantage. So during the webinar, if you have any questions, you'll notice in the panel on the side that there's an ability to answer questions, and we'll be monitoring those, and we'll either fit them in during the webinar, or we'll come back at the end of the webinar to address those questions. So please do feel free to participate. And without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Craig from World First. So welcome, Craig, and thank you for coming today.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you to everyone at Tame Bay for hosting us today. As Chris said, this is part of a webinar series that we're doing. There's going to be 3 webinars, but the overall theme is how to master international success, and it ties into that white paper that Chris mentioned. So just to introduce myself a little bit before we get started. My name's Craig Agter. I'm actually the head of corporate online and e-commerce at World First, the international payment specialist. What we do is work very closely with online sellers. We have done for over 12 years now, specifically around marketplaces, helping them expand globally, but then also helping them to get the most out of any sales receipts, currency generated by overseas sales on those marketplaces, and that's really where all of our experience and expertise has come from, is vicariously really from hearing from online sellers themselves what challenges they're facing and helping them overcome them during their international sales journey. So this morning we are covering understanding the international selling trigger, why and when to expand abroad. Now, that might seem obvious to some of you listening. In fact, actually, I imagine probably a large proportion of you are already selling abroad, whether you made a conscious decision to or not. And that's really what we're going to cover, is the opportunity, exactly how to research, how to plan, and the timings of doing that. There are, as I've got on this slide, there are 2 more webinars. The next one's in 3 weeks' time, and it's around making the right choice on where to trade abroad, specifically around certain markets and countries, and the categories that do well in each of them, and particularly nuances. And then finally, on the 5th of December, we're looking at how to use marketplaces to best effect. So how to use marketplaces to enter a market and potentially expand your sales as well within existing markets. As we mentioned before, please do navigate over to Tame Bay's white paper that we helped contribute and sponsor. It's specifically talking to those £1 million sellers, so how they've gone about entering markets, what obstacles they've had to overcome, particular challenges, and what the opportunity is in various markets. It's a great read, if I do say so myself, but it's definitely worth a look over a cup of coffee or tea when you have a chance. So today, what are we going to look at? Why would you sell overseas? As I said, it might seem like an obvious question, but remarkably, there are still some businesses, particularly newer online businesses, that perhaps haven't made that leap yet for various reasons. What signs indicate a business is ready to grow globally? So what are the telltale signs that actually now is the right time to look overseas for your next customer? And then the practicalities potentially. I mean, we'll look at quite a high level view, but I'm happy to field any questions that anybody has regarding perhaps some low level practicalities. But just giving you a few tips on researching, planning, and the timing of entering overseas markets. And then finally, we'll look at somebody who has made that leap, who has done very well out of launching internationally, and the steps they took in that process. So why would you sell overseas? Now, during the compilation of our white paper, we surveyed a lot of £1 million sellers to find out what the primary reason was that they actually decided to make a conscious decision to launch overseas. So you can see from this graph here, I'm not a big fan of graphs, but I'm afraid there are a couple in this. But it's quite illustrative in that, although domestic saturation, so the oversupply perhaps of particular products or brands in a market can prompt people to look at other markets. Improving margins is also a chunk there that as a motivation for why you would look overseas. Perhaps either currency moves can dictate that actually you can buy more pounds with the sales that you're generating overseas. But actually, the biggest chunk, over 70% of respondents cited that it was actually customer-led sort of move. So in terms of the makeup of that particular chunk, some of those were looking at sort of actively finding new customers, so increasing the customer base, so actually going out there and searching for some, but also a very similar sort of proportion were customer led in that they already had customers overseas that they were selling to. They just perhaps weren't actively marketing in that particular country. The customers came to them, so actually it became perhaps an easier decision to formally enter that market. In terms of UK businesses and the UK market, I mean, you're probably all aware of this, or at least have some sense for, the proportion of online sales as total retail sales in the UK. It is fairly mature compared to many other markets. As a comparison, I mean, we're currently around the 18% mark. As a comparison, if we look at global retail sales at present, we're actually forecast this year globally for e-commerce to make up just shy of 12% of total retail sales. So, there's perhaps less headroom in the UK than there are in other global markets. And that's something really that is worth bearing in mind. The growth potential of other markets is perhaps greater. Certainly, if you're finding UK sales challenging, or that they've plateaued, or you're not getting any you're not gaining any significant market share, it's certainly time to look at new markets, as I'm sure you appreciate. But in terms of those markets, we've got a bit of a breakdown here at the compound annual growth rate forecast from this year through to 2022 for certain global markets. You can see the UK is actually trailing then right at the bottom of this particular list. We've got very high growth, but perhaps challenging markets to enter, like India, Indonesia, the other LATAM countries, Asia, Middle East, and Africa, that are sort of dominating the top half of the table. But having said that, even looking at countries closer to home, like Spain, France, Germany, they're still a leap ahead of the UK in terms of the growth potential over the next 4 years. So it's exciting place to be, really. If you haven't made a significant jump overseas, then that's really where to start looking. Is look close to home, look further afar, perhaps, if you've already made that leap into the more obvious countries. And I appreciate there are logistics challenges, and we'll go into that in the second webinar in this series as to how to navigate some of those and actually enter those markets without incurring significant risk or expense. But in terms of UK companies within the global stage, first of all, a vast majority of global online shoppers are actually buying from overseas companies, whether they wittingly or unwittingly. It's happening. So cross-border trade is not something you can ignore as a new online seller, or an online seller that's been predominantly focused in the UK market. Indeed, Oh, sorry, go on, Chris. Sorry.
Got a question for you, Craig.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
What do we think the impact of Brexit will be on trading with the likes of Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, people that naturally buy quite a lot from us at the moment?
Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, as I've got on this slide, we've already got, that they are markets that, the UK performs very well in terms of selling to those consumers. I was perhaps going to skirt around the B word somewhat, because I mean, the biggest factor of Brexit is the uncertainty that it's creating, really, as to what the transitional arrangement is going to look like, how long that will go on for, but also what the ultimate impact is going to be, maybe 2 years, 3 years from now. The reality is that, until we have more certainty around what those terms look like, we won't really be able to make a very clear judgment on the impact that it's going to have on trade. However, in a slightly less tangible way, if you look at how the UK is regarded at the moment, it is really going to be the imposition of any sort of tariffs, any sort of increased compliance requirements when it comes to actually accessing those buyers, that is going to take the shine off any UK brands or retailers in the eyes of those online shoppers. So in terms of the actual products, in terms of the implicit guarantee of quality that people get when they buy from UK retailers or brands, I don't think that that's going to be materially affected, and I think that we see that in consumers in China that are consistently buying items from British brands and retailers because they just know that it's a sign of quality, and it is something that also translates to more mature markets like those in the EU and in the US and Australia. And actually, those countries, the US and Australia, are probably going to be some of the beneficiaries of being able to, or us being able to negotiate bilateral trade deals with them, and potentially being able to make that a more favourable environment for UK business. Having said that, I'm by no means the authority on all things Brexit, unfortunately, perhaps for some of the people at home or at work tuning in. But it is something that you will have to navigate once we have more clarity over what that looks like. In the meantime, my suggestion is it's a market that's ready to access immediately if you have the resources, and it's something that you should make hay while the sun shines. Really, that would be my personal take on it. Were there any follow-on questions from that, Chris? Or was that
no.
the one?
Thanks for that tricky one.
It always is. It's a minefield, but anyway, hopefully I've danced around the mines there.
As I said earlier, if anyone else does have any questions or follow-on questions, please feel free to drop them into the side panel, and we'll pick them up straight away.
Great, thank you. Right, so we've established that there is a real demand overseas for the UK products and brands. So. Signs you're ready to go global. Now, this is by no means exhaustive, but it's certainly just something to have in your mind or as food for thought. So, in terms of signs that your business is equipped for overseas expansion, and what I mean by that is, do you have the infrastructure in place? So, the first thing to tick off potentially is that your current and potentially future customers are already based overseas. So if you're looking at your sales data, and we'll get into this a bit more in a moment, and you are shipping overseas, but you don't have any sort of marketing presence there or any marketplace strategy or listings, that is really what I would say is a quick win. If you already have that, if you're already fulfilling those sales. Secondly, on the topic of fulfillment, you really need to make sure that either you have that international infrastructure when it comes to storage and fulfillment in place, or that you have a provider that can scale. Now, a lot of the marketplaces themselves offer their own services. I know Newegg do, so does Amazon, obviously. But there are also other third-party providers that can warehouse your products, can handle customs duties, that can actually, do the final mile in your chosen country. That is something you will need to make sure you have in place. Obviously, it won't work. It may work initially, but certainly not for the longer term, and not in a scalable way. It won't work to constantly be fulfilling your products from within the UK. It will be necessary, particularly with advancing consumer sort of demand, really, and expectations around quick delivery. I mean, it's something that Amazon have built their entire marketplace strategy and first party strategy really around their Prime service. It's about quick delivery in market, and if you do not have some sort of inventory based in those countries, it will be more challenging potentially depending on the types of products you're selling. Thirdly, have a absolutely rock solid understanding of your cost base and pricing strategy. Pricing strategy can be quite tricky entering a new market, particularly obviously if it's not denominated in pounds, which is very unlikely to be. So, factoring in exchange rates, not just in the price of your products, and that doesn't just mean taking your UK RRP and multiplying it by whatever exchange rate is on the day. I mean, it can do if you're in a particularly competitive category or you're a reseller. I mean, it does make sense obviously to have it as competitive as possible compared to other sellers in the market, but also it would be about finding a price point that works, that is consistent as well, so that buyers' expectations, they don't go to your product one day and then another day suddenly the prices jumped or dropped by $15 dollars or euros or whatever it is. That can actually create a lot of holding off from consumers. That sort of uncertainty could actually negatively impact, even if it's positive for consumers. Ultimately, they think, "Oh, I'm getting a better deal than I was yesterday." It can actually erode perhaps some of the value of your brand, and allow you to erode the margins ultimately that you're realizing from that. And secondly, when it comes to actually bringing those funds home, if you are bringing them home, just making sure that the exchange rate that you are getting when you are converting those funds matches the pricing that the exchange rate that you've actually been pricing at in the first place. Obviously, if you're pricing at one exchange rate and it moves against you, and then suddenly you're bringing it back home at a very different exchange rate, that will impact your margins, and could put you into some difficulty potentially. I've laboured that point a bit, but finally, your suppliers, manufacturers are international. What I mean by that is that they have the capability, they might not actually be based internationally, but they have the ability to scale with you, to enter new markets with you, so that you're not locked into potentially, region-specific distribution deals where you can't actually sell a portion of your inventory internationally. You really need to make sure that as much of your catalog is available to international buyers as for your domestic market. And in terms of the benefits of overseas expansion, what I really meant by that is that these are the specific scenarios perhaps or criteria by which it really could be a benefit from you to look overseas. So I mean, obvious one, your UK sales have plateaued or slowed down. If that's the case, you could end up throwing significant or it could be a significant expense, or throwing money at sponsored listings or PPC to try and maintain the same level of UK sales, particularly if you're in a competitive category, as most of them are now in the UK market. So it's really an opportunity for you to look at other countries, seeing what the domestic preferences are in that country, and really tailoring your offering to that. When I say you own your brand IP, including private label sellers, that's really an opportunity for you to take ownership of that brand and really introduce it to a market as you would want to, and really following on from that, localization there is the opportunity. It's about taking a fresh start almost, and being able to position the brand where you want it to be. It could be a case that there are particular uses or applications or local preferences that actually dictate you rebranding it to some extent, but the freedom that you have in doing that for a new market is really the opportunity to drive sales. And finally, again, around your own brand or intellectual property, if you already have some sort of activity or following around your products in a particular market, whether it's I put social media or influencer there, but it could be anything. It could be people discussing it on forums. It could be somebody selling it in the grey market. It's really about you taking ownership of that, you've already got a leg up there because there is some awareness. And if consumers in other markets are going to the effort of buying cross-border, which they are, we've already seen that from the previous statistics, then just make sure that you are taking control of that, and that's really, a big sign that actually it's a good time for you to enter a market and take control of the conversation around that product. So first step, research. It varies by the seller to seller, but the commonality across all sellers is that those that have done their research and really understand what the opportunity is, what the potential upside is, and how to realize that, and which channels are going to work, benefit the rewards, not just initially, but in the longer term as well. You only get one chance to make a first impression in a market. And if you're not doing that in a very coherent or committed way, then it can negatively impact your brand. So first thing to do is to look at your own proprietary sales data, as we said before. That is, it's yours. It is owned by you, and it is nothing that your competitors have. Okay, they'll have their own sales data, but you will know already where you are selling to, how you are fulfilling those orders, what sorts of prices that those consumers are buying at, whether you're actually pricing in local currencies or not. It can form a baseline for where you start to investigate the potential for your product in that market. And by the same token, talk to your esteemed partners. So whether it's an integrator, it could be you chat to somebody at Limworks or Channel Advisor or whoever you're using, and they have some expertise or some insight into what other companies within the sector are doing, or within your category are doing, and they could potentially, give you a bit of a steer there. So always take that on board. Again, you don't want to rely entirely on that. You do want to check that yourself, but it's a great way to sort of uncover or shine light on particular opportunities or channels that could work for you. And speak to peers within your sector as well. There's numerous. I go to numerous events. I know all of you probably do as well, where it's an opportunity to network with other sellers, get a feel for what's working for them, what's not. There might be competitors there, and it's great just to find out from them, get a feel for how business is globally, domestically, because it might be something that you weren't expecting that they say that pushes you in a particular direction to investigate further. Secondly, aside from your own internal data, externally there is more marketplace data and news out there than ever before. We have great sort of enthusiast and industry news sites like TameBay to thank for that. But also there's, third-party services or apps. I've mentioned Jungle Scout there, but if there's a particular product that you sell that you want to know, okay, what is, how does this rank in certain markets? There are products out there that can help you with that, whether they're free or they're paid for. Although it might seem like an initial expense, it would be more expensive to go into that market blind. So it's worth paying for expertise really, or the tools you need. And finally, I said there, aggregate marketplace data providers. One such one is Marketplace Pulse, but just something to give you the temperature of a particular market. It might not give you very much actionable insight when it comes to specific categories, but having some idea of what the general trends are in a market. It might be that a marketplace looks great for your product, but actually buyer numbers on a particular site or Amazon country or whatever it is on the wane. Then it might be something to reevaluate, because it might not be quite, you might not get the same traffic that you were expecting. And also on a more sort of country and marketplace level, there are some great resources out there. The DIT gets quite a lot of airtime, and rightly so, in terms of their online marketplace finder. You can find it on their website under the services section. I think it's Sell Online or Sell Online Overseas. I can't remember exactly what it's what it's listed as. But the great thing with that as well is that if you do want, you can specify the categories you're selling in or particular countries that you're looking to find information on marketplaces. They'll list what's available or who they work, who they have some agreements with or whatever. And the great thing with that as well is that most of them also have some sort of introductory or preferential offer for anybody that goes through that site that they've negotiated. So it could be a couple of percentage points off commissions, or free subscription fees. Every little helps with this sort of thing. And the fact that you're going via DIT also gives you some recourse as well to engage with their digital advisors as well, because they also have a feel for what other companies in your space are doing, and could give you some useful pointers as well. And also another third-party marketplace finder that's quite intuitive, quite useful. I've got a screenshot of it there below. Is Lengo's marketplace finder. Lengo are an integrator. They help people selling across multiple channels. Their marketplace finder is completely free. It's on their site. It's worth a poke around. They've got some useful guides per marketplace as well on there. So definitely, check those out if you haven't already. But it's certainly a useful resource. And then it's moving into planning your international sales move after you've done the research. So you've settled on a market. You think, right, okay, this is where I'm going in. I probably know which products I want to sell in that market. It's time although we talked a lot about marketplaces, we don't want to also run roughshod over direct website sales as well. So I've listed there, whether it's and/or. To be honest, one usually follows the other. Companies can often find that entering via a marketplace is, a low barrier to entry, as I've got there under advantages. Given that you don't need much in the way of infrastructure in place, you upload your listings. You can probably use listings across domestic marketplaces. Obviously, you'll need to localize, but you've got a local audience there, and you can also take ownership and control of your brand as well with a lot of marketplaces. Enhanced. Well, I certainly know on Amazon, you've got enhanced brand content, but any sort of brand registry, trademark protections, any sort of protections that they can offer on that side to make sure that any sellers that are acquiring your product or selling via the grey market perhaps are properly vetted or have the authorization from you to do so. Obviously, the advantages of selling via your own website, which may follow marketplace entry, is that you own the buyer. You own, you've earned them via, PPC, SEO, however they've come across your product, and you own them moving forward. So in terms of that customer experience, it gives you more leeway perhaps for remarketing, special offers, and hopefully repeat business off the back of that. So and not only that, they also go through your online website and that customer experience and that UX, which you can then tailor according to how you want your brand or your products to be perceived. I've put there no sales commission due. Obviously, when it comes to selling on marketplaces, you do often give up a significant portion of that, and payment gateways offer more payment method choices potentially if you wanted to enter, or if you wanted to provide payment options locally to Chinese buyers, for example. The chances are you probably be able to find some gateway or PSP that could offer you some sort of WeChat or Alipay payment methods, which might not be possible with certain marketplaces. So again, very similar to what you'd be looking at domestically, but again, in terms of the order in which you do it, marketplaces can be a route to entry there. And compliance, it sounds really dull, but it's so important. So things like things at a product level, whether it's plugs or adhering to international or local standards, particularly within food or any sort of health and beauty, baby products. Those are key to make sure that you're in compliance with those, whether you're selling via your own website or via marketplace channels. it's a hot topic at the moment, but tax reporting and tax payment compliance as well is really key. So having some way, and I mean, when you're selling internationally, that's obviously there is distance selling thresholds when it comes to actually selling into markets from within the UK. But as soon as you are storing stock in other countries, whether it's in Europe, it might be that you signed up to Amazon Pan EU. Then you'll need to understand where your products are and where they're being shipped from and where they're going to, in order to understand where you need to register for tax and how much to pay tax in each country and so on. Enlisting the help of a specialist. There are lots out there that specialise in online sales, tax and VAT. There are a few that pop to mind: Simply VAT, Avalara, Meridian Global. They all have a way to help you register and report tax in the jurisdictions that you need to. And then looking at localization, translation, and in-language customer service, that doesn't just fall down. That isn't just regarding making sure listings are properly localized, but it's also looking at any sort of PPC or sponsored listings you're doing as well. If you're on Amazon and you're trying to drive traffic to your particular products, listing them amongst all of the other millions of SKUs that are on the site is probably a way to get buried and not a great way to enter the a particular country. So just making sure that any terms that you're bidding on, any campaigns that you're running are properly localized and are actually performing as they should do. Similarly, when it comes to in-language customer support, whether you do that in-house or if you're using some of the marketplace fulfillment options, that is crucial, because as soon as customers start leaving bad reviews, that is a surefire way to enter a bit of a downward spiral. And the number of online sellers that I've spoken to over the last 10 years that probably jumped the gun a little bit, got a bit carried away with Amazon Global Selling and said, yes, I'll list everywhere and I'll just upload my listings and it doesn't matter, I'll put everything through Google Translate or machine translation. It works to a point, but when it comes to starting those bad reviews start coming in and they accumulate, it won't be long before seller performance drops and you find yourself in a bit of a sticky situation moving forward. And finally, on that note, international trademarks, brand registry, just making sure that if you are selling a brand or you have a particular product that you're selling, that you are compliant with any existing brands that are, registered with the marketplace or trademarks that are out there. But also for your own products, making sure that you have them all properly registered. Now, there is a bit of a trade-off between the expense of doing this versus, any value in doing it. So that's something to bear in mind. It can be expensive to go out and trademark your brand in every single market that you make sales in. It might not make sense. But certainly looking at key markets and making sure you're setting yourself up for success in the short term, but also crucially for the future, so that you don't find yourself usurped by somebody else who is sitting on your trademark or who is trying to sell your products in the grey market. Just making sure you have a bit more control over that. So it is crucial to look at that before you actually enter a market as well. Whether you have any intention of selling there immediately or not, it's worth having an ongoing sort of review of what you're doing in that respect. And finally, actually getting the products to your customers and getting paid for them. We've talked about it already. When it comes to whether you're merchant fulfilled or whether you go via marketplace methods that they have, where that stock is actually located, but also thinking about the customer journey for anybody who returns products. If you're selling in clothing or fashion, you know that the return rates are higher for, it might be somebody orders 10 different sizes of the same product. The reality is they're only going to keep one. It's making sure that you have a robust enough solution to manage any storage that's required within country of those returns, and potentially refulfilling them to other customers, providing the products are undamaged, and how you're actually going to have somebody review those products and check that they're fit for refulfillment as well. There are specialists out there. They vary in expense and the types of the target audience or companies that really it makes sense for. I know Zigzag Global are very active in the fashion sector, so that's something to certainly look at, whether that would make sense for your business. But it really can pay dividends down the line. It won't be an immediate uplift, but it could reduce your overall costs and actually turn into another revenue stream for you if you're able to exploit refulfilling within country. And the bit that we probably focus on most, well, first, local payment methods you accept, what currencies, how you manage fraud, chargebacks, refunds, and how do you mitigate those currency movements. So I put here as food for thought, is that if you're selling into the US, for example, you decide to enter that market, the chances are you probably have some US dollar commitments when it comes to suppliers or manufacturing costs. You can actually offset those. You can net those off, providing you have a solution in place that lets you do that lets you receive dollars from marketplaces without any conversion, and then using that same currency to make those payments out to other third parties. Like we here at the World First with the World account, we can help with that, not just in dollars, but 6 other currencies in local markets as well. And it's about having a solution that works with those marketplaces or those particular payment gateways in the case of Stripe or Adyen, just making sure that you have a solution for collecting currencies locally. It might be that you do exactly what you do with marketplaces' own payment methods and send them straight to your home account, but the value in collecting those currencies locally is that you have a bit more control over what exchange rate you convert at, whether you take any sort of hedging or currency strategy, towards that. So it could be booking a forward contract so that you lock in an exchange rate for your busy Q4 period, because you want to be sure that you are realizing that exchange rate every time you're bringing those funds into pounds or converting into whatever currency you want. And that's something that specialists like World First, and there are other companies out there that do it, can help with. So I'd certainly suggest speaking to a specialist in that respect, because although it can be an afterthought, it can really make a huge difference to your bottom line, particularly with a lot of political uncertainty like Brexit and these other, events like the US midterm elections coming up. You don't want to be caught out because you've been so focused on growing your business. You don't want to have to think about these other factors, but the specialists out there will think about them for you and notify you proactively if there's anything that you should be thinking about. So you get that in place. What about the timing? Now, I've kind of picked out three time frames really, and it's not very specific. I'm not going to give you exact dates or quarters to launch in. It's not because the reality is it will vary seller to seller. It won't be consistent. So the one thing that we have seen people do is launch just before big retail events, because they're worried, it's a gold rush. They're worried about missing out on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas. The reality is when it comes to marketplaces, it's actually unlikely that the marketplace will let you do that. Purely to manage their own customers' experience. Quite often there are blackout periods prior to any big retail events where they'll say, if you're a new seller, you're not eligible for these because you're an unknown entity to us and to our buyers. So just making sure that you are launching well in advance of those periods, perhaps during slower sales periods, to make sure that you work out any kinks in your setup, any unforeseen, you will make mistakes, as I've put there. There will be missteps. You will probably incur costs that you didn't expect. By doing it at a much lower volume and during a much less busy period, it allows you time to really evaluate it and not make knee-jerk choices and decisions that could actually impact your domestic sales, because ultimately, if you're not yet international, those domestic sales are 100% of your business, and you do not want to you only want it to add value when it comes to international sales. You don't want it to detract from what you're doing already. Similarly, kind of follows on, but when your customer service or delivery team is ready. So as I've said before, bad reviews, unhappy customers, it just doesn't wash off easily. It takes a lot of undoing, a lot of unpicking, a lot of goodwill gestures, a lot of engaging with customers to try to rectify that. So as I've said, better to start slowly, whether that means fewer products in the first place, fewer countries, fewer marketplace in each country. Get it right first time, and you'll reap the benefits later on. And again, I've already covered it to a large extent, but moving into international markets can help you reclaim those grey market sales. So what you don't want, and what we've seen with other big brands is, they've come to the marketplace piece or international markets a bit later in the game, and they've actually realised, hold on a minute, we have grey market sellers that are buying our products in one, effectively doing geographical arbitrage, buying in one market, selling in another, which is great because we're still making sales, but actually that end customer experience in that international market isn't what we want it to be. It doesn't reflect our brand's values. It isn't making a positive impression. You have no control over that. You have no control over the customer service that they experience, any warranties as well that are not valid in certain international markets, that can actually sour customers on your product through no fault of your own. So it's about getting out there and engaging with local customers. So really, it's a bit of a brand hygiene piece, really, more than talking about reclaiming, well, I'll put it there, reclaiming grey market sales like it's a land grab. But the reality is that they've already validated a market for you, those grey market sellers. You can already see that your products are ranking somewhere in the sales tables. So actually, it's about working alongside them, perhaps bringing them a bit more into the fold, or alternatively, actually putting in some more hard geographical barriers between certain markets when it comes to who's able to distribute in certain markets. Again, won't make sense for everyone, won't make sense for every size of seller, but it's something to bear in mind. Even if you're a small seller or just started out with 3 products versus somebody who's been doing it for decades with hundreds, having more control at that early stage will actually set you up later on as you add more product lines, as you add more markets, as your sales grow. So it is definitely worth bearing in mind at this stage. So that is a bit of, as I said, it's quite a high level, but hopefully it gives you at least that high level checklist to drill down on later on. And that is something that we will be doing in the later webinar series. So the one thing that I wanted to sort of round out on was a bit of a summary of one brand that's actually successfully launched internationally over the years and how they did it, which is RDX Sports. You may be aware of them, you may not. They're a leading UK-based boxing, martial arts, including mixed martial arts and fitness retailer. And they've got lots of big names there amongst the athletes that they're involved with, including Anthony Joshua, most sort of topically, as well as Michael Bisping and Amir Khan. And what they actually did, particularly for entry into the US market, as we've said before, they successfully launched on Amazon and eBay. First of all, they built up a bit of a following. They were allowed to, they were able to build a bit more marketing around those stores and around the RDX brand in general, and were initially directing people to those marketplace channels in order to buy. But actually, what it did is it was a useful validation for being able to go out to local distributors and actually exhibit and highlight that they actually have this level of demand in this country, and actually at a local level, it made sense for them to use distributors that model, who they'd actually been able to pick out to grow that US market and to scale that quickly. Initially, they used those performance and sales statistics from the marketplaces to actually prioritize that initial international expansion into the US, but also into Europe, and identify the real growth opportunities. And although the US, Europe, and the UK are their strongest markets, it's actually that those marketplace channels have also allowed them to expand in Asia, Australia, and China, where they've also got very significant sales as well. And it's not about doing everything in house as well. It's about knowing what to engage, where to engage with specialists, and which bits to do themselves. Obviously, a lot of the branding and marketing they want to take control of themselves, but when it comes to the actual fulfillment, they're using FBA to help scale and grow international sales, and they find that works really well. And obviously, the added benefit of that is that Amazon take responsibility for the customer experience there. So although they can focus on getting the products right and really making something that customers will love, and then Amazon obviously then handle the customer experience and the delivery and any returns that come out the other side of that in those international markets. And really, that's probably the model that a lot of sellers will follow. Some won't. Some will start with their own website sales and then look to use marketplaces as a supplement in terms of channels to that core D2C website channel. But it's certainly something to bear in mind when thinking about examples of how that can look. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening patiently to me going through, the when really of international expansion. As I said at the start, this is the first webinar sort of content ticked off. The next one's in 3 weeks' time. We'll be talking about making the right choice on where to trade abroad. We'll be looking at some of the statistics around the countries, and then we also have a follow-on webinar on the 5th of December as well. And final plug as well for the white paper. It's completely free. Go and download it, have a look. As I said, it's a great bit of bedtime reading, perhaps, but it's certainly something to digest, think about. If nothing else, it's worth 5 minutes of your time. And yeah, at this point, in case Chris has any questions, I'll open the floor to any of the attendees' questions they have.
Yeah, just before we go to the question, for anyone that would like to attend the second webinar, if you go to Tamebay right now to tamebay.com and click on events on the top toolbar, you'll be able to register for the webinar on the 14th of November, where we'll be looking for the right choice on where to trade abroad. So look to understanding when you're ready to trade overseas today. But now we'll look on where you should trade overseas, and then in the third webinar on the 5th of December, it'll be how to use marketplaces to best effect. So Craig, I thought it was very interesting. You were saying not to launch during busy sales periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Singles Day, Prime Day, etc. Have you got any advice on how to actually maximize on those events once you have launched overseas? Should you be if you're launching now, should you be thinking it's still time for Christmas because it's 2 months away, or is it obviously Singles Day on the 11th of November is a bit soon, but is it how long do you need to prepare for these events?
I mean, as much planning as possible, really. I mean, it depends on the marketplace, on the market, but in my experience, and again, this has come from talking to sellers that are trading internationally on Amazon. The best strategy you can really have when it comes to those sorts of sale events is to really engage with your account manager or the team at Amazon, for example, because I'm sure lots of you are aware the lightning deals of the week, those promotions are where Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Prime Day, and so on, they really come into their own. And it's really the reason that any buyers go to those sites during those times anyway, is to look at the promotions. So there are some that are curated. So I think certainly around the deal of the week and some of the promoted lightning deals that obviously they're curated or have to fulfill certain criteria from Amazon themselves. But if you're launching well in advance, so I'd say at least, a quarter prior to these events, really, and certainly no later than September, planning for your Black Friday promotions and things like that. But just putting together a compelling proposition for a few of your products in order to drive traffic to those sites and to start building reviews, start building trust in your brand as a seller on those platforms. That's certainly probably the minimum that you should be looking to do.
Fantastic. And the final question is a payments question, and actually one that people keep asking on TameBay, and I may be a bit unfair. You may well not have the answer to this one.
Right,
people have been very interested in eBay intermediating payments on their website in replacement of PayPal. And the question that they keep asking on TameBay has been asked today is, what happens when I'm trading on eBay in the UK in pounds and European sites in euros and the US site in dollars? Will eBay do the financial exchange and just pay me in sterling, or will I be able to make use of services like yours and actually choose when I want to move my dollars from my US sales back into sterling if I want to move them?
Sure. So I've actually been sort of following a lot of that chatter on your site as well, Chris, around with specifically Adyen sort of handling the managed payment side of eBay moving forward. And I mean, to be honest, a lot of it is still developing. Obviously, I believe they've only sort of soft launched at the moment, or allowing sellers to opt into the US side of things at the moment. So that'll be sales on eBay.com, as far as I'm aware. I don't know if you know any different, but that's as far as I've seen it.
So far, yes. It's just people are well aware that services like World First can save them an awful lot of money on their Amazon exchanges, and they want the same for eBay. They're hoping something will enable them to use services like yourselves.
Sure. So I mean, to stop meandering around the houses, the reality is that it is still developing. We don't know quite what the options are going to be on the back end in terms of being able to collect those funds locally. However, from World First perspective, we are, we're certainly capable of receiving those payments and converting them at, preferential rates, preferred times, whatever clients want to do or sellers want to do to take a bit more control when it comes to those receipts. I mean, in the past, having PayPal in there, it has actually been very difficult to collect those currencies without going through PayPal's currency exchange rates. So that if anything, I think that is to be welcomed in terms of it gives the merchants a bit more control. I know that there's been a lot of blowback in terms of working capital loans and things like that, and those turnover those funds not going through PayPal anymore for eBay sales. But in terms of the currency side of things, I think actually it will be a positive thing for sellers. And they'll be able to use the World account. Yeah.
Watch this space, and if you're not already a World First customers, make note of the telephone number and email address that's on your screen at the moment.
Absolutely, and give me a call or my team, and we'll gladly discuss it to whichever length you wish. Help you make an informed decision on that side.
Craig, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today, and really looking forward to the next webinar in a couple of weeks' time and just a reminder, it's on the 14th of November at 11 a.m. And if you go to TameBay and click on events in the menu bar, you'll be able to sign up immediately today. So look forward to seeing you there. And once again, thank you so much for your time today, Craig.
No problem at all. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in as well. It's been great to present to you.
Goodbye, folks.